Though dwarfs not be prone to change, it is known to happen from time to time. Hello everyone, and welcome back down here to the Gamer's Den with me, your host, Jordan, your master of lore and storyteller extraordinaire, here to talk to you about changing up fantasy cultures, and today we are going to be taking a look at the Dwarves. But before we get into all of those details, if you're new here to the channel, then go on down to hit that subscribe button and become a regular member here at the Gamer's Den. Or, if dashingly awesome folks such as yourselves have already listed yourself on such a legendary list of personages, then go on down to hit the like button and share the video far and wide to help spread the word about the channel. But now, let's go ahead and talk about some dwarves. So, with dwarves, they're fairly universal-ish, with enough commonalities that you can tell a dwarf is a dwarf is a dwarf is a dwarf across multiple settings, stories, locales, times and places, and different kinds of books. I mean, the biggest difference with the dwarves from the Warhammer world and, say, the dwarves of Faerun are that the Warhammer dwarfs don't have a concept of forgiveness, whereas the dwarves of Faerun, they absolutely do. Now, this may be varying somewhat from dwarf to dwarf and world to world, but more or less it's the biggest difference between the two. But otherwise, they're very clan-oriented. They value honor above all, and then they work underneath great mountains and hills, carving out networks of tunnels, mines, building great, incredible works of stone craftsmanship, and produce some of the finest works of metal and alloys and smithing that you could possibly ever hope to lay eyes on. And hell, dwarven jewel crafters, oh my god, just the immaculate and precise nature of such works. These things are pretty universal as well, especially the stonework and building great structures and monuments. Those things are absolutely pivotal and critical to them. Hell, dwarven fortresses are also known to be absolutely stunning and incredibly difficult to take, if not nigh on impossible, without being willing to throw waves and waves of numbers of troops at such martial edifices. And they're not only that, but they're also peerless warriors, and the fact that they can live about 500 years or so means they get plenty of time to practice and hone their skills to a very refined and deadly edge. So, what are some cultures that help to embody these things? Well, I've got two that come to mind. The first are the Romans. Now, with the Romans, they definitely had a system of different great families, and there are a lot of lineages tied up in military service and the like, and since military service was how you gained governmental authority, you had to serve a certain amount of time in the army, commanding armies, leading, before you could move up to higher and higher positions of authority. And so, this ties in pretty nicely with dwarven culture and architecture. This is a way of utilizing the clan-oriented, family-oriented structure that you typically find in a lot of fantasy settings for the dwarves. Not only that, but take a look at some of the great works that the Romans have left around. Like the roads that they set up and paved are still in place. You have the Colosseum, all these different structures and buildings and statues that are just absolutely astounding with how long they've lasted. Sure, some of them have fallen into a great deal of disrepair and are, only now just kind of being kept up and kept from falling into further degradation, but still, the fact that these things lasted, or the great aqueducts, that help supply massive amounts of water to the different cities. Just incredible works of not only stonework, but engineering as well. And don't forget that they had some of the best infantry in the world as well. Well, some of the best. Tip top, you could make arguments for or against that, but even still, they were deadly and effective with heavy-duty armor, large shields, and shorter weapons for fighting in close. In this case, the gladius, which definitely an effective weapon, but still a nice big shield with heavy armor pairs nicely with the battle axe as well too, if you wanted to keep the battle axe as being a thing, a single one-handed axe, because an axe is all offense, whereas shield and armor helps to offset those deficiencies that the axe otherwise has. Now, the second culture I was thinking of that fit pretty nicely with this are the Japanese, specifically looking around the Sengoku Jidai period of Japan, which you could almost think of that as Japan's late medieval-ish time period, where a lot of firearms started to be introduced and manufactured. Now, the reason again is because, one, a very much clan-oriented societies, particularly at the higher levels and echelons, where you have the different samurai clans, the different daimyo, the warlord factions that were warring in Japan, about 100-ish, 105-ish different feuding fiefdoms underneath different daimyo vying for power and supremacy, trying to bring Japan all under a unified shogunate. Not that you necessarily need to have the clans be fractured for your setting, unless that makes for an interesting story, and I certainly would endorse such a thing, but you can still keep that clan-oriented family structure in place there. And not only that, but take a look around, just Google it even, if you haven't been or haven't seen it, just the great fortresses that they built, and not only that, but the great structures that they would build in Japan as well. Still build, but, you know, the great earthen and stonework fortresses, and the temples and monasteries that they built, the fortress monasteries that the monks of the Ikkyo-Ikki would build. Absolutely stunning, gorgeous, immaculate, and very, very much a very deadly thing to deal with and come up against. I mean, these structures are still standing, both through maintenance and also by virtue of their design and the time that people took with developing these things. Also, can you really say that the samurai were not peerless warriors? They were absolutely staggering in their ability, although amongst each other that ability may have varied somewhat, but even still, that still ties in pretty nicely. That disciplined, focused, regimented mindset fits neatly with the dwarves, and I like the idea of dwarven samurai with a daisho set, although it's important to note that the samurai were swordsmen as a secondary role. They were primarily archers, so this does take the dwarves into an interesting direction because it's not something that they're typically known for. But something that they are very much so known for is using gunpowder weapons, and the Japanese used a lot of gunpowder weapons. Actually, the Ikkyo-Ikki, again, they were militant Buddhists, and they were gun manufacturers. By some estimates, and based off of the records and like, that there may, at this time period, towards the later end of the Sengoku Jidai, there may have actually been more firearms in Japan than there were in Europe. Which, given the differences in landmass, that seems pretty staggering, possibly unlikely, but hey, when you have militant Buddhist monks that are doing nothing but manufacturing firearms en masse, and you can definitely see where that, and you know, not only the manufacturing, but the fact that European traders were bringing firearms, and you can kind of see how maybe that happened, at least for a little bit. So, you have immaculate, incredible levels of craftsmanship, like with the fortresses and their weaponry and the armor, using the materials that they had. I mean, Japan does not have a lot of great steel or iron deposits for making steel, and so they had to really maximize the effectiveness of the steel that they could produce. So that led to better levels of craftsmanship to maximize what they could make, and so on and so forth. You get the idea. Both of these cultures overall, I think, present an interesting opportunity to really diversify and change up the dwarves. And given the rigid structures and guidelines that both cultures have, the Romans and the Japanese, the Romans with their intricate series of laws, the praetors, the governors, the different governmental positions that were fundamentally tied with military office, and odd laws like no Roman military force under force of arms could enter into the holy city of Rome. They couldn't cross the Rubicon while armed and armored up, except for in the cases of triumphs, but I'll skip the history lesson for now. Point is that there was a lot of rules and intricacies to their laws that the great families and the great political factions of the Roman Senate that they would use and levy against one another. And you have a similar thing over in Japan, where culturally they have this set structure of laws, very rigid set ideas, especially after you get towards the Toyotomi dynasty, where the different societal structures were put in place that made samurai samurai, merchants merchants, and farmers as farmers forever. And the ways and dictates of social interactions that happen between these different societal factions and groups. You just have very lawful oriented societies in both of these cases. Where they fall on the good or evil side of things just kind of depends, and I would say weigh that out from clan to clan, person to person, faction to faction, but ultimately you have a lot of tools to play with here just in these two cultures. But what do you think? Go on down to the comments below and let me know your thoughts. Did you like today's video? Did you dislike it? Let me know and we'll engage in discussion down below. Hit those like or dislike buttons, and remember, if you're new here to the channel, then go on down to hit the subscribe button and become a regular member here at the Gamers Den. And with all that said, I've been your host, Jordan, your Master of Lore and Storyteller Extraordinaire. Thank you all so very much for your time, and you all have yourselves a good night.